The arrival. K-Rethes 9 was a war zone. Not in the traditional sense, not trenches, not orbital firestorms, but in silence. The kind of silence that meant sensors no longer worked, drones refused to fly, and comms stuttered with static shaped like screams. The Veltrax swarm had infested the planet's core systems, rewriting code, hijacking infrastructure, turning the Coalition's strongest weapons into obedient pets. And so far, every attempt to retake the surface had ended in failure. General Asar, of the Arlek Dominion, watched the loading bay from the observation deck with mandibles clenched. He was expecting a battalion, at least 500 human soldiers. Maybe armor. Maybe one of those dreadnought-class orbital cannons he kept hearing about in whispered briefings. What arrived instead was 12 humans. Just 12. Dirty. Laughing. Unshaven. One was chewing something. Another carried what looked like an ancient music speaker slung across her back. Their leader, a compact human in matte black armor with scars across her scalp, stepped forward and saluted with 2 fingers. "Commander Elise Varga. Systems Engineering Division," she said. "You called for reinforcements. We brought a solution." Isar stared, his secondary eyes narrowing. "Where are your soldiers?" Varga smiled. "It wasn't pleasant. We are the soldiers, General." The Coalition War Council assembled 2 hours later. Varga stood before a semicircle of 6 alien officers, Arlek, Turek, Velnari, all of whom had lost troops, fleets, or territory to the Veltrax. The room was thick with distrust. "You are not combat personnel," Admiral Velnari hissed, her body a glistening coil of crystal and vapor. "You're engineers. And yet we're the only ones who volunteered to land on a Veltrax-contaminated world," Varga replied. "Funny how that works." Isar's tone was ice. "We expected a fighting force. You bring scrap haulers and tinkerers." Varga didn't blink. "Tinkerers, yeah. We tinker with enemy systems. We tinker with physics. Sometimes we tinker with the definition of warfare. Soldiers follow protocols. We write them." A pause. Then she activated a holo on the table. A map of K-Rethes 9's northern hemisphere flickered into view, but overlaid with it was a second, erratic diagram. Tunnels not in official records, power fluctuations no AI had predicted, anomalies in temperature and gravity readings that made no logical sense. "This is what the Veltrax are doing underground," Varga said. "They've built a logic lattice, a self-learning computation network using the crust's minerals and heat sinks. You're not fighting a swarm. You're fighting the world itself." The room was silent. "So we're not going to fight them conventionally," she continued. "We're going to crash their lattice." "How?" asked a Turek captain, blinking a dozen eyes. "We have blueprints for geothermal overloads. We have modified anti-code pulses. We have a field-hacked AI whisperer that speaks corrupted Veltrax packets. And," she added, pulling a small glowing orb from her coat, "we've got this, a repurposed fusion core rigged to detonate with a decaying frequency. It doesn't explode, it deletes." Someone coughed. It might have been a laugh. "You came with a bomb?" Isar said. Varga pocketed it. "No, General. We came with options." Outside, her team was already busy. One set up a jamming tower from broken drone wings and copper wiring. Another dissected a Coalition vehicle and replaced its core with what looked like an industrial blender. One human lay prone, humming as he spray-painted symbols onto the dirt. Not for art, but for heat absorption and sensory deception. "These people," one alien soldier whispered to another, "don't look like warriors." "No," the other replied. "They look worse." That night, a Veltrax scout drone emerged from a tunnel 20 kilometers east. Standard Coalition scanners didn't detect it, but a broken toaster did, wired to a seismic sensor with a rat's nest of human cable. It triggered a trap built from discarded artillery shells and kitchen chemicals. The explosion leveled the entire ridge. The sky burned orange. Hours later, a message blinked on the Coalition's main terminal, unsigned. "System test complete. Beginning real operations at dawn." Improvisation doctrine. The Coalition escort team had been briefed on human irregularities, but nothing prepared them for what they saw on the first mission with Commander Varga's team. It began with a refusal. "This is standard issue Coalition gear," said Lieutenant Harnack of the Turek Enclave, gesturing to crates of pulse rifles, drone scouts, and terrain-adaptive armor. Varga shook her head. "Won't need it. But it's the best available. Exactly the problem, she muttered. Instead, her team carried what looked like scrap. Customized exocets with duct tape on the joints, industrial welding tools, AI-deafening sound bombs, and something called a rat cannon, which turned out to be a pneumatic railgun made from rebar and melted scaffolding. The alien soldiers stared. Then they moved out. The ruins of Outpost Delta were silent. No movement, no enemy readings, just scorched metal and tangled wire. The Veltrax had consumed everything with quiet efficiency. The terrain was an unnatural blend of fused glass and growing machine spires, like the world itself had been rewritten in binary. Coalition doctrine would demand defensive positions and orbital support. Varga's team scattered like rats at a feast. Engineer Hector climbed into a collapsed communications tower and started rewiring it into a localized jammer. Kessie, a field hacker with a 1,000-yard stare, cracked open the remains of a Veltrax probe and began muttering code sequences into her wrist pad. "What are they doing?" Lieutenant Harnack asked. "Learning," Varga said, adjusting a makeshift sensor helmet. "We don't charge the enemy. We confuse them until they start tripping over their own logic." Within an hour, the site had changed. A broken plasma conduit became a booby trap. The collapsed storage depot hummed with microwave interference. One engineer drew strange, irregular lines on the sand with black powder, seemingly random until a coalition drone flew over and veered wildly off course. "Magnetic field spoofing," Varga explained. "Veltrax think in paths and patterns. Break the patterns, break the swarm." The Veltrax didn't attack in numbers that day. They sent scouts, cautious, silent, insect-like machines with limbs that flickered in and out of phase with reality. One crept toward a hill, unaware of the hacked motion sensor buried beneath it. When it tripped, the hill exploded, not with fire, but with high-frequency sound and flashes of corrupted signal bursts. The drone spasmed, then fell over. Smoking. Kessie laughed. That one tried to recompile itself into a tree. "Idiot." Harnack stared at the carnage, stunned. "How did you predict that?" "We didn't," she said, grinning. "But we gave it a reason to panic." Night fell fast. A coalition officer attempted to reassert control. "You're violating strategic protocol," barked Commander Revex through the comms. "This entire sector is a high-priority defense zone. You're dismantling infrastructure." Varga replied without looking up from her makeshift terminal. "It's already lost. We're just making sure the Veltrax can't use it." "That's not your decision to make." "No," she agreed, calmly uploading a looping corruption string into the local grid. "It's the right one anyway." Static. Silence. Then comms cut. Harnack turned to her. "You just ignored a coalition direct order." "I didn't ignore it," she said, voice even. "I prioritized results over decorum. That's the difference between an engineer and a politician." By morning, the battlefield had changed again. What was once a predictable grid of Veltrax towers now buckled under false signals and phantom power surges. Varga's team had reversed polarity fields to overload their logic routines. Some drones tried to flee. Others spun in place, their internal processes consumed by contradictory instructions. At 0400, a detachment of Veltrax combat units attempted a coordinated push through the northeast corridor. They ran directly into a death funnel. Coalition observers later described it as a kinetic anomaly. Improvised mines, repurposed gravity wells, and a hacked auto turret made from the hull of a crashed transport. The engineers didn't just hold the line. They disassembled the attack itself. It wasn't war. It was sabotage on a planetary scale. Later, Harnack confronted Varga. "You're not fighting like soldiers," he said. "You don't follow rules. You don't even hold formations." Varga just looked at him, wiping grease from her face. "Soldiers are trained to win battles," she said. "Engineers are trained to solve problems. And the Veltrax? They're not just enemies. They're a problem." She gestured to the horizon, where drone husks still burned, where the terrain now pulsed with distorted frequencies that scared even the synthetic. "War's just a symptom," she added. "We fix the disease." Harnack didn't respond. He just watched as her team walked into the smoke, carrying tools instead of rifles, and realized that maybe, just maybe, the most dangerous human on the battlefield wasn't the one with a gun. It was the one with a wrench. They burned their own maps. The transmission arrived encrypted, but not well enough. "Cease all unauthorized operations. Return to designated command post immediately. Await tribunal review." Commander Elise Varga barely glanced at the message before deleting it. Coalition Command had finally decided to intervene. Too late. Her engineers were already deep underground. They called it Project Glass Spider. Not officially, of course. No coalition authorization meant no codename registry. It was what her team called it over comms while crawling through Veltrax-infested tunnels with sonic mappers and scrap explosives strapped to their backs. The Veltrax had burrowed deep into the tectonic seams beneath K-Rethes 9, nesting their logic lattice where geothermal vents could power their thought webs. Down here, in the glowing guts of the planet, the war wasn't fought with weapons. It was fought with thermodynamics and data corruption. "We could bring the whole crust down," warned Hector, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "It's unstable. Not just the Veltrax tunnels, the entire mantle chamber is full of microfractures." "Perfect," Varga said, lighting up the rough plan on her cracked wrist pad. "If we're lucky, they've already networked their minds across the substrate." "If we're lucky," Kessie muttered, "we'll only break half the continent." No one laughed. Back on the surface, coalition satellites picked up strange readings. Localized temperature spikes, electromagnetic storms radiating in circular pulses, AI ghost signatures hopping between abandoned relay towers. To the coalition's strategic planners, it looked like the Veltrax were escalating. They were wrong. It was the engineers. Varga's team had begun rewriting the battlefield, not just disrupting enemy positions, but altering the entire environment in a way the Veltrax couldn't adapt to. They weaponized the ecosystem, released spore clouds laced with nanites to scramble infrared tracking, spoofed geothermal data, so Veltrax systems overheated their own cores, trying to stabilize non-existent temperature deltas. Launched false seismic waves to trick Veltrax drilling units into digging into dead zones. They didn't follow terrain. They redefined it. Coalition Command sent down a direct order. Stand down. This level of environmental tampering violates interspecies warfare accords. Varga responded by transmitting a single line of corrupted code. When Coalition AI tried to parse it, it bricked 4 administrative cores. After that, they stopped trying to talk to her. The Veltrax were intelligent. Machine minds evolved to think across distributed processes. But they weren't built for unpredictability. They calculated, optimized, predicted. And now, every prediction failed. One by one, Veltrax hive nodes began collapsing, their logic spiraling as their internal maps no longer matched the physical world. Entire segments of their swarm simply shut down. One unit attempted to self-correct, rewrote its command lines mid-execution. It exploded. Another began mimicking human improvisation, jury-rigging its own structure in a panic. It fell into a thermal sinkhole the engineers had designed to mimic safety parameters. They were unraveling. Not from bullets. Not from bombs. From uncertainty. Isar watched the live feed from a low-orbit surveillance drone. His mandibles clicked nervously as he observed Veltrax formations turning on each other, lost in loops of bad logic and self-contradictory sensory data. "They're panicking," he said quietly. A Velnari officer to his left whispered, "They don't understand the battlefield anymore." Isar leaned forward. "No, the humans took it away." Below, in the tunnels, the final sequence was underway. Varga stood before a control column of half-melted Veltrax core structures, patching alien code together with human firmware and duct tape. Around her, engineers locked in explosive charges rigged not to detonate, but to vibrate at destructive frequencies tuned to the Veltrax thought web. "Once we hit the lattice node, we light the feedback loop and run like hell," she said over comms. Kessie's voice crackled back. "There is no run like hell here. You know that, right?" "Figure of speech," Varga said, flicking the final switch. "We're engineers. We make the impossible work." And then she lit the node. The Earth screamed. From orbit, it looked like the northern hemisphere of K-Rethes. 9 exhaled, dust, ash, molten gas, and neural data scattering in every direction. Entire Veltrax logic grids disintegrated. The swarm fell silent. Later, a coalition tribunal demanded answers. Varga never appeared. Only her report did. Operation concluded. Veltrax neural lattice destabilized. Environmental damage, extensive but surgical. Outcome, confirmed success. Recommendation: stop using soldiers for engineering problems. They were furious, but they couldn't argue with results. In the weeks that followed, the Veltrax launched no further offensives. Not just on K-Rethes 9 anywhere. Intelligence suggested they were reformatting, rebuilding, retreating from uncertainty. Coalition Command issued a quiet internal memo. Effective immediately, deployment of human engineering teams must be approved at the highest level. Use only in extreme circumstances. Their presence on a battlefield is no longer a tactical decision. It is a strategic risk. And in the margins, someone had scribbled, "They don't just break rules. They break the world to write new ones." The cost of precision. The battlefield was quiet, not silent. Nothing on K-Ret 9 was ever truly silent anymore, but quiet in the way a graveyard might be. The kind of quiet that came after history ended and something new began. Commander Elise Varga stood atop a shattered ridge, staring at the horizon. The landscape below was unrecognizable. Scorched valleys, vaporized ridgelines, and patches of terrain that still glitched under sensor scans. The Veltrax swarm had once occupied every inch of this hemisphere. Now nothing moved. She tapped her comms. Status report. Hector's voice came through, tired but alive. Seismic readings stabilizing. Feedback pulses decaying. The lattice is dead. Casualties. None of ours. Varga closed her eyes for a moment. That detail mattered, because while her team lived, the world beneath them did not. Coalition rescue ships arrived 48 hours later, hesitant as vultures. Medical officers tried to take her engineers in for debriefing. They refused. Instead, they salvaged the broken tools they'd left behind, double-checked the detonation arrays they'd buried, and marked "Do not touch" signs around areas still resonating with ghost code. "They're not behaving like soldiers," one officer remarked. "No," his superior replied, watching as an engineer wired a damaged terrain mapper into a child's toy drone. "They're behaving like something much more dangerous." The tribunal convened in orbit. 4 admirals, 2 AI judges, 1 reluctant Arlec diplomat serving as the neutral observer. Varga didn't argue her case. She showed them footage. Clips of Veltrax units spiraling into recursive failure. Diagrams of logic stacks disrupted by environmental illusions. A heat map of the neural collapse she and her team had orchestrated in the enemy's deepest core. "The swarm wasn't defeated by overwhelming force," she said. "It was overclocked and out-evolved. We didn't crush it. We corrupted it into fear." One AI judge responded flatly, "Your methods were unregulated. The ecological damage was calculated," she interrupted. "Targeted. We designed every phase of the plan to collapse their cognition without triggering a planetary extinction event. Ask your own science divisions. They'll tell you we performed surgery with a hammer." "Then why do your records contain so many improvisations?" the Arlec diplomat asked. "Half your decisions were off-plan." "That's the point," Varga said. "They couldn't adapt to chaos. So we became chaos." The room went quiet. After the tribunal, Varga returned to her quarters aboard the retrieval vessel. Her engineers were scattered across different decks, sleeping, repairing gear, or quietly decompressing in corners. None of them celebrated. There was no victory march. No medals. Only debris and exhaustion. Hector found her staring at the stars through a viewport. "You know they'll never let us do that again," he said softly. "No," she said. "They'll try to make sure they never have to. They'll write 100 regulations to keep us leashed." "They'll fail," Varga replied. "Because next time they'll come to us sooner." Quietly. Desperately. Hector leaned against the wall. "It's a funny thing, isn't it? We were just supposed to build things. Fix broken systems. We still are," she said. "Only now they realize we can break systems too. Better than anyone else." Back on K-Ret 9, a coalition survey team found a structure buried beneath the collapsed Veltrax tunnels. It was not Veltrax in origin. It was human. A dome-shaped shelter constructed from scavenged alloy, filled with data logs, field notes, and something they didn't expect, a beacon. Not a distress signal. A warning. Written in 5 major galactic languages, it read, "If you find this place, turn back." It was not conquered. It was unwritten. The logs explained how the engineers had created layered zones of instability, regions where logic broke down, where machine intelligence began to doubt itself. They described a kind of warfare that wasn't physical or digital, but epistemological. A war for the reliability of reality. The coalition classified the site immediately, but the rumors spread faster than bureaucracy. In the years that followed, stories traveled between planets. Not of elite shock troops or armored fleets, but of something far more terrifying. A dozen humans, armed with only their minds, dismantling civilizations like puzzle boxes. Some say one engineer rebuilt an enemy AI core, just to make it hallucinate its own death. Others whisper of a bunker on Othrel Station, where enemy code still screams in binary, trying to understand why its creators abandoned logic entirely. The name Varga became shorthand in military briefings, not as a person, but as a protocol. In the event of systemic threat escalation, invoke Varga condition. Which meant call the engineers. Burn the maps. Start over. Because soldiers fight battles. But engineers? They rewrite the war.